Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to RoahmMythril 3, and as I've been sitting here listening to this music, I realized that there's actually a lot of different Wily themes that are kind of put together here. Pretty nice arrangement. But anyway, it's time to look at judge commentary. So we're looking at the comments for 175th place, X6Meme by It the It, 15.6 out of 100. Also, full disclosure, X5 was the last of the X games I actually played, so I don't exactly know enough about X6 to know what the particular meme here was. Anyway, overall this got a 4.2 out of 35 for design, 2.2 out of 25 for fun, 3.8 out of 15 for creativity, 5.2 out of 15 for aesthetics, and 5.4 out of 10 for functionality, but did lose points, 25% due to time penalty for being turned in late. So, now to the actual judge commentary. Mick, 13 out of 100. Full disclosure, unlike the previous major RoahmMythril contests, we had measures in place that allowed us to remove levels from the running entirely. If a majority of the judges agreed that it broke one of the major rules, it would be cut. Otherwise, all 5 of us had to unanimously agree that it warranted removal. And we're all very different people, so that's genuinely hard to get. That I could legitimately beat it 100%, no need for debug cheats, saved it from a majority vote against truly unreasonable difficulty, and I've seen enough fledgling creators make abhorrently terrible stuff to figure that X6Meme, despite the name, is a genuine effort, so it couldn't get a unanimous exclusion vote. Thus it's sitting here, albeit in dead last. Does that mean the level is truly worth playing? Well, I didn't think I'd ever say this, but now I'm craving snake donuts. Okay, the donuts I remember, I believe those did show up in RoahmMythril 2. Certainly I would have preferred them to what's here. The level's opening section does it no favors already, with pixel-perfect jumps on ice with Bomb-Bombs, Machine Gun Joes, and Gabioles, all of which have little to nothing to do with X6. Needless to say, busting out special weapons is a far better choice to make here. That's followed by a long falling section with the level's graphics deliberately breaking down, which I'll admit, that's at least a cool visual. But then we get to the big, very heavy quotes, highlight of this level, the upwards auto-scroll, and words do not adequately describe how utterly and thoroughly unreasonable and downright miserable that section actually is. If, by some miracle, you're reading this review before playing this level, take the judge panel's advice, especially the fact that this was nearly cut from the contest entirely. Use the skip, save your sanity. This entire, several-minute-long section was unbelievably awful, and it completely overtakes the rest of the level just by virtue of being that bloody awful. I'm craving snake donuts, legitimately. The original Blaze Heatniks was better than this, and X6 was certainly way more interesting than this, because the rest of the level isn't interesting or even super worth talking about. Well, one other thing is worth talking about. The aesthetic in the energy element room is awful, and doesn't communicate pits very well, which has caused at least one death and subsequent unnecessary rematch. Oh no! Oh gods, I didn't even think about that. Otherwise though, I wouldn't say this is my least favorite level, as the Mecha Dragon on tiny ice blocks was at least somewhat cool, but yeesh, what a miserable experience. Little distracted there. Shinryu, 9 out of 100. That is a very nonplussed Bugs Bunny. I was all set to leave my review as that picture above and call it a day, since this is one of those rare occurrences where I felt a full review wasn't completely necessary. All of this stage's issues are glaringly obvious, to the point where it's very easy to see why this level ended up where it did in the rankings. That being said, I don't want to be completely unthorough with this review either, so on that note, here's a list of this level's biggest issues. The haphazard tile placement makes the stage itself look like a jumbled mess. There's even a spot where spikes are used as background details of all things. Yeah, that did make me a bit nervous during the fall. Enemy placement feels more like an afterthought than anything, at least up until you get to the auto-scroll segment, where they become far more of a nuisance due to the sheer hectic nature of that section. There are gaps leading up to the boss that you can't jump across without utilities. All hail the magnet beam, thank goodness that's here. Mecha Dragon's fight is made much worse due to the limited space you have to avoid his fireballs, along with the floor being entirely spiked. Also, just throwing it in there, the non-animated lethal lava in the back. Given that the last screen is basically a giant pit, it's very easy to accidentally fall in when you first enter the room, and of course dying here means refighting the Mecha Dragon. I'm almost surprised I didn't manage to just fall in that pit. I think that pretty much covers it. There is a potential argument to be made that this stage isn't really a genuine effort, but rather was submitted to the contest as a joke, on account of its name among other obvious factors with the level design listed above. Even if that was the case, however, I'm firmly in the camp that level design like this shouldn't get a pass simply for being under the "it's a joke" umbrella. Patchy, 37 out of 100. Blaze Heatnik's Fire Bird. Well, there is certainly a clear inspiration from one of X6's most infamous levels. Annoying and tedious auto-scrolling sections filled to the brim with equally annoying respawning enemies and instant death hazards. Prepare for a bad time if you plan to buster only this, as some parts during the tower climb essentially lead to dead ends with impossible jumps. I don't hate myself enough to try to do this stage buster only. With as tanky as some of the enemies are in the climbing section, like the hotheads, or, the Joes constantly shielding themselves, I ponder if buster only is even viable. A lot of the platforms are very narrow too, so you can bet you're going to get knocked straight into the non-rising lava of death from one stray bullet. I was so busy concentrating on the climb, I didn't even notice that the lava wasn't rising after you. It kind of feels like it should have been. I think mentally I just assumed it was when it very clearly wasn't. For a double whammy, let's also introduce puzzles into this. Puzzles with no prior introduction on how they work nonetheless. Yeah, I'm not sure I ever really figured out what they wanted at that point. Then when you reach the Mecha Dragon boss, it's just a very underwhelming climax. The boss AI remains unchanged. The fireballs from the dragon are fairly simple to dodge, even with limited space, and if you get knocked off the platforms, there are spikes that serve as safety beds, as these aren't Mega Man 1 spikes. The token does not exist. Well, put it this way, I have no idea where it is. Flashman85, 19 out of 100. As a blind judge, determining whether a level is an honest attempt or an exclusion-worthy troll is a matter of interpreting what the level tells me about itself. This level tells me, unquestionably, that it is purposefully terrible for a laugh at the expense of the player. Why is X6Meme worthy? Because of its notoriously bad design choices. So what possible best-case scenario would have this ending up as a good level? It doesn't help that there's a reference to MagMammal 2's Snowman, a verified troll level. I have vague memories of that one. I don't solidly remember what it was. The repetitious challenges are pure pain. Small icy platforms surrounded by pits that are barely close enough to jump across unassisted, swarmed by speedy spines, and the most notoriously difficult version of Sniper Joe. A messy auto-scrolling sequence subjecting the player to 3 minutes, the length of an entire NES Mega Man level, of instant death at the slightest mistake, culminating in an out-of-nowhere puzzle gimmick that's guaranteed to get players killed before they figure out what's going on. Gods, was it really 3 minutes an attempt? That explains why it added up the way it did. An incredibly missable token found after the interminable auto-scrolling sequence. So it was somewhere after the climb. Recall that none of the game's secret finding upgrades were implemented when these levels were created. Oof. Following the boss fight, a cruel fake-out where the floor is secretly a bottomless pit, requiring the player to freeze immediately or die and refight the boss. Yeah, again, I'm almost shocked I didn't fall for that. There's no way anyone playtested this. A buster-only run is absolutely ludicrous, yet special weapons make the horizontal stretches utterly pointless. Problematic construction is patently obvious in the last couple of screens. I argued strongly to have this excluded. Obviously, it's still here. Basic functionality, decent aesthetics, and some original ideas, and actually thoughtful weapon refills are worth a few points, but I'd just as soon give this a 0. And Aespark, 26 out of 100. There was actually a debate amongst the panel whether or not this was a deliberate troll attempt. We'd already yeeted out a couple of stages that we think crossed the line. The debate came down to whether or not we thought this was intentionally malicious or just plain incompetent. I think the latter, for what it's worth. It was a long debate, though. Even if it isn't a troll, it also isn't playable. But a few choice changes might have made it even remotely playable. Namely, some some specifically infinite ammo weapons, one or two more wider platforms to remove most of the pixel-perfect jumps, and removing that Mega Man 1 enemy, Flying Shell, who is frankly just absurd in a level like this, resulting in it being a right pain in the tail even long after it's gone off screen. Yeah, Flying Shell was a thing in this stage. It was an expertly placed enemy to where its shots were hitting just the wrong spots to make it just horrible to deal with. That and a puzzle, imagine me making finger quotes when I say this at the end of the vertical climb, that's timed and frankly impossible to parse until after several deaths, because the switches appear long before the puzzle itself. It's obvious this level is designed around the weapon set. I don't mind stages doing that, but when stages do that, they need to make that more obvious from the get-go. Again, praise the magnet beam. Infinite ammo on certain weapons absolutely puts the player into that mindset. But this stage starts off with lots of impossible jumps, tons of Joes and pit enemies, yet I found it doesn't really sink in what it expects until the climb and the absurd amount of ammo lying at the start. Yeah, I think that's kind of how it hit me too. Other than just really needing to get rid of some of those spines early on, yeah. The climb is obviously the worst part of the stage, and for reasons I explained earlier. After that, the final corridor and boss is like, whatever, man. Ah, my favorite Robot Master. I think if the few things I mentioned had been implemented, it might have been playable. I went in afterwards with the debug command that gave infinite ammo, and it was playable more or less. So yeah, utterly incompetent, utterly devoid of fun, not much more needed to be said. Awful level, really. And that takes us back there. So, yeah, my overall thoughts on the stage, I'm pretty much in line with that. As someone who never played X6, I don't really get the joke part of it, so all I'm left to judge on is the stage and its own merits, which, yeah, I think the crazed screaming kinda speaks for itself. It is something I do feel like, at this point, I could probably go through it again and do decently at the climb, just because at this point, I know where everything is. But do I really want to? The sad thing is I'm going to have to at some point to go and get the poker chip. Which, again, yeah. Although now I'm annoyingly intrigued now that I know from that one judge comment that it's somewhere after the climb. Which does mean I'll have to do the climb again at some point anyway. God's help me, I'll probably end up playing this stage more after I record this. It doesn't bug me, it doesn't bug me, it doesn't bug me, it bugs me a lot! Okay, so yes, I did indeed go back through the stage, and it did reinforce something I was talking about. Knowing where everything was during the climb, I was able to get through it in only 2 attempts this time. It's kinda like an extended force beam section. It's learnable, but it's very much a learning by death situation, which, considering this is a slow upward climb, feels a lot more tedious than a force beam section, if that makes sense. At least that's how it was for me. And in either case, your mileage may vary as to how much patience you have for the learning by death design theory. Me, I'm stubborn. But yeah, being able to get through the climb in less attempts, I won't say it makes the stage any more fun per se. It's still a hassle to get through, but it is at least learnable. But, yeah. The question of removing this stage, of if it's unreasonably just unplayable or not, I admittedly don't think I would go that far, but also, I am not quite in the position that the judges were, working on judging these stages for, what, somewhere from 3 to 5 years they were having to deal with all of this, and who knows how many other stages they had to go through before this one, because obviously they didn't receive the stages in the order we're going to be playing through them, so this wasn't the first one they had to deal with. So, you know, who knows where their mindset was at the point that they got to this one. I honestly feel for them. But obviously, I was able to get through it eventually, so it is, at the end of the day, playable, but, doesn't necessarily make it the most enjoyable or delightful stage. Yeah. So, yeah, this certainly was an introduction to the, to the game. And yes, it is also my own fault for not just using the skip. I'm stubborn like that. Unless something really does just flat out strike me as completely unreasonable and just not fun, I will not be using the skip teleporters. I'll just visit them long enough to see what the problem is for which they were warning about the stage, because I do think that is interesting, and will also give us warning if ever Motion Sickness Man shows up. But, yeah, that's pretty much it. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well. Where's that blasted poker chip?